My name is John Taylor. I'm the president of Tertium Quids. I spoke in Charlottesville earlier today. They had about 1,400 people. I think you've got them by more than 3 to 1. I've read that as a young man, Thomas Jefferson had a hobby. He would write a thought or a concept in what he called a commonplace book, and then he would refine what he'd written and edit it down until he had distilled it to the point that it contained the same original thought but expressed in the fewest words possible. That hobby obviously served Jefferson very well, because a few years later it took him a sentence and a half to stand the world on its head. Yes. It took him a sentence and a half to change world history. Yes. I think earlier today Doc Thompson read you that sentence and a half. It's the one that starts, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," and it ends with that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. There you have it. In a sentence and a half, Jefferson established a new order for the ages. It takes him a sentence and a half to answer all the great questions of political science. No longer was the hierarchy the king, the court, and the great unwashed. Now the role of sovereign would be performed by the people themselves. Yes. People had rights. Those rights didn't come from government, so those rights couldn't be taken away by government. The power that government had was only given to them by the consent of the governed. The purpose of government was limited to just protecting rights, and when government attempted to overstep its bounds, the people could choose between altering or just getting rid of it. Now let's add a little context to that. We think sometimes we're much beleaguered with the people that we have to fight and the obstacles we have to overcome. When Jefferson wrote those words, it's important to note that the King of England was sitting on the throne. There's a king in France. There was a king in Spain. There was a king in Prussia. There was a Tsarina in Russia. There was an emperor in China. There was a shogun in Japan. This was not the ideal world for someone to step forward and talk about individual rights and the people being sovereign. At the same time, Jefferson's own country was being occupied by the greatest imperial force the world had ever known to that point, and that was the British. But you see, our founders recognized that there were two ways that society could be organized. It could be organized coercively through the legalization of plunder, or voluntarily through the recognition of markets and private property rights. Fortunately for us, our ancestors chose to leave us a legacy of freedom. My, how things have changed. Whereas the founders believed the role of government was to protect our rights, today the primary role of government is to serve as a financial intermediary between the people who produce wealth, that's me and you, and the people who want access to that wealth, who happen to be large donors to political campaigns. Yes. Today, the Jeffersonian hierarchy of the people being free to live their lives with government ensuring we can do just that has been replaced by a system where increasingly the people seem to exist for the benefit of the government. Right. They don't want to kill us, fortunately, as we are perceived as being much too valuable for that. They just want to shear us once every year. I believe today is the day. Yeah. From sovereigns to sheep in 233 years. But let's change gears for a moment. We've discussed what our founders stood for and what they tried to pass on to us. The question we need to answer today is, what do we stand for? Will we reassert our sovereignty, or every April 15th will we stand naked in the fields, ripped off and humiliated again by the government that we let get out of control. In the last 5 years of Bush's term, President Bush's term, the federal budget grew by more than $1 trillion. The federal government today spends $193 million per hour on just entitlements. That's not the whole federal budget, that's just entitlements. On Good Friday of last year, the Social Security and Medicare trustees released their annual report that showed that the present value of the unfunded liabilities for just Social Security and Medicare is now more than $100 trillion. The prescription drug bill passed during the last administration added $8 trillion of unfunded liabilities to a program that was already underfunded by $15 to $20 trillion. David Walker, you may recognize that gentleman's name. He's the former Comptroller General of the United States and head of the General Accounting Office. He's been crisscrossing the United States for the last several years on what he calls his fiscal wake-up tour. His purpose has been to try to bring attention to the perilous fiscal position this country is in. This is prior to Obama. Walker has stated the most serious threat is not someone hiding in a cave, but our own fiscal irresponsibility. Now, why does he say that? He says that because beginning on January 1st of last year, some 78 million Americans in the baby boom generation became eligible for Social Security. In 3 years, they start becoming eligible for Medicare. That's an average of almost 10,000 new beneficiaries per day, every day, 365 days a year for 20 years. Who could possibly have seen this coming? Anybody with a brain could have seen this coming. Walker has also said we are mortgaging the futures of our children and our grandchildren, and this is not only an issue of fiscal responsibility, this is an issue of immorality. Today we are told that our fiscal crisis is due to a failure of capitalism. What do out-of-control government spending, $193 million per hour for entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, prescription drug bills, what does any of that have to do with capitalism? Not a thing.